Hello and welcome to my video all about how to do the knitted cast on. Casting on is where you add the stitches to your knitting needle at the beginning of a project. And alongside the long tail cast on method, this is one of the most popular techniques. Just like the long tail cast on, this knitted cast on is a good all-rounder and creates quite a stable and sturdy edge with a bit of stretch. One advantage over the long tail cast on is that with this cast on you don't need to leave a long yarn tail. Instead, you just need to measure out about 10 to 12 inches of yarn and then make a slip knot, like so. This yarn tail only needs to be long enough to weave into your project at the end. Then you need to do most of the steps of a regular knit stitch. So take your other knitting needle and go up through the stitch on your left hand needle. Then cross the right hand needle behind. Wrap the working yarn anti-clockwise around the right hand needle point. Bring the right hand needle point and the strand of yarn to the front. And this is the point where you stop doing a normal knit stitch. Instead, you pull the needle slightly to make the stitch larger, like so. And then hook this stitch over the left hand needle point. You want to make sure that the left hand needle point comes up through the stitch like so. Then remove the right hand needle and tighten the stitch. You don't want to tighten the stitch too much though, because you now need to put your needle back into that stitch. Since the slip knot counts as a stitch, you now have 2 cast on stitches on your needle. So we'll just repeat that again. So take your right hand needle up through the top stitch and cross it behind. Then wrap the working yarn and bring the right hand needle point to the front. Then pull on the needle to make the stitch larger and hook that stitch over the left hand needle point, like so. Tighten the yarn a little bit and that's another stitch cast on. And then you just repeat that all over again. So take your right hand needle up through the top stitch on the left hand needle, then wrap the working yarn and bring the right hand needle point to the front. Pull on the needle to make that stitch larger and then hook that stitch over the left hand needle point. Tighten that stitch slightly and then just keep repeating this until you have as many stitches as you want. If you take a closer look at the edge now, you can see that it's the smooth side that's facing you, and that's the side that's made up of diagonal strands of yarn. Whereas facing away from you is the bumpy side, which is made up of purl bumps. If you're wondering if it makes a difference which way you hook that stitch over the left hand needle point, then the answer is yes, it does make a difference. Here you can see a swatch that I made, and on the left I used a technique where the needles were pointing towards each other, as I'm demonstrating here. In the middle, I used a technique where I just hooked the stitch with the needles pointing in the same direction, but I didn't do the extra twist. And then on the right, I've just used the method that I've shown you so far in this video. You can see that there are quite large holes on the left and the stitches are fairly loose. Then in the middle there are still holes, but the stitches look a lot more symmetrical and tighter. And on the right hand side there are barely any holes at all. The reason for this is that as you move along to the right, we've done more twists in the method, and that's made the stitches a bit tighter. Some people do use the same technique as I used for the central stitches, and I can see why. The stitches do look neat and symmetrical, even if there are holes in between. So really in the end it's personal preference. Okay, so going back to the cast on, I'm just going to cast on a few more stitches. Once you've cast on as many stitches as you want, you can then just knit or purl or do whatever pattern you want as normal. I'm just going to do some stockinette stitch, so that's a knit row, then a purl row, then a knit row, then a purl row, etc. And here you can see the result. It's a nice stable edge and has a little bit of stretch. I really hope you found this video useful, and thank you very much for watching.